Today's video is about the fork. So what is a fork? A fork is when any piece attacks two or more pieces at once. There's another idea of the double attack, and the double attack is very similar to the fork, but that's when you threaten a piece and you also threaten checkmate. So the first problems that we're going to look at are some pretty simple fork puzzles. And then later at the end of the video, we're going to look at some double attack puzzles where you might have to look for checkmating possibilities and also try to find a piece that is unprotected. So this is the first puzzle, and I'll give you 5 seconds. Take a look at the puzzle. It's white's turn to move. Can you find a white piece that attacks two unprotected pieces or pieces of more value at the same time? Bishop e7 attacks both rooks. When one rook moves, we capture the other rook, winning the rook. So here's another white puzzle with another simple fork. One thing I'd like you to notice is that the queen and the king are on the same file. So see if you can find a way to fork. Did you find rook g5, check, and attacking the queen? The queen must capture the rook, and we capture the queen. Another easy fork. This is a fork, obviously, with the knight, which is one of the most memorable forks in chess. Knight e3, forking the king and bishop. King moves out of check, we capture the rook. Here's another fork. This fork is a sacrifice and then a fork. So you have to, this is a puzzle that you have to think 2 moves ahead to find this fork. Rook captures b5, rook recaptures, and now in the next move, we need to fork. The bishop forks, the king moves, and we capture the rook on b5. Another easy fork. I will give you one hint. Take a look at how the queen and the bishop are lined up on the 5th rank. Did you find rook e5? The queen moves, and we capture the free bishop. This is another knight fork. Did you find knight f5? Check. King moves, we capture the rook, and we win because we had 2 attackers on that. That's not a rook, that's a bishop. Check. We capture the bishop, and we win because we have 2 attackers on that bishop. Knight e4, check. King moves, we capture the bishop. So in this puzzle, take a look first at all of black's unprotected pieces. Let's go through and find the pieces that are unprotected. So the pawn on h6 is protected by the bishop. The pawn on f6 is protected by the king. The bishop on f4 has no protection. And the pawn on a5 is protected by the pawn on b6. The b6 pawn has no protection, so see if you can find the fork. Knight d5, and we get a free pawn. One more easy fork before we move on to the double attack puzzles. So take a minute and see if you can find a fork. Did you notice that there are two attackers on the d5 pawn? And if we capture with our bishop, check. If the queen captures our bishop, we capture the queen, check. Okay, now we are about to try a few puzzles that are a little bit more difficult. These are double attack puzzles. So we are going to be threatening checkmate and also attacking a unprotected piece at the same time. I want to draw your attention over to the bishop that's on c6. This bishop is unprotected. Another thing I'd like you to notice is that the bishop on e5 is pinning the g7 pawn. So that means that the pawn that's on a6, h6, is also unprotected because a pinned piece cannot move. Therefore, it cannot protect. So take a minute and see if you can find a way to exploit or take advantage of the bishop on c6 and also this pin against the g7 pawn. Did you find rook d6 attacking the bishop? Now, see if you can find a checkmate in 1. Did you see rook captures h6? Checkmate. Now, why is it checkmate? Because the g7 pawn cannot capture because of this pin. And if you notice, the light squared bishop is covering the g8 square. So there's no moves for the king. That's checkmate. All right, this is another double attack puzzle. So before we do this puzzle, I want you to imagine your knight was on this square, f7. This would be check, and the king would really have no move. So what would be the only way for black to get out of check? Correct, the black queen would have to capture the knight. So see if you can find a way to play a very attacking move and get your knight over to the f7 square. Did you find knight g5? The queen moves, and now we check, and the only way for black to get out of check would be to capture our knight, and then we would recapture with our rook, which would be a very, very, very good for us. So let's go to the next puzzle. This is another double attack puzzle that also leads to checkmate. So once again, let's take a look at the squares around the king. So we have this bishop on d3, which is controlling this entire diagonal of light squares. We also have this pawn on h4 that's controlling the g5 square. So the king is not in checkmate because the king's not in check. The king is actually stalemated, meaning that the king can't move, but it's not a stalemate draw because black has so many pieces, they can make a lot of moves. They're not forced to not make any moves. So what we need to do is we need to think about a way to use another piece that we have and check the king. But we also need to play an attacking move. So we want to use one of our pieces to check the king, creating checkmate, and also attack a piece at the same time, which gives us a tempo to play the checkmate. So let's, for this one, let's take 10 seconds. Did you notice that the knight on d6 can attack the black rook? The black rook moves, and now we can deliver checkmate. Which square would we move the knight to create checkmate? There are two options, but only one is checkmate. Knight f7, checkmate. And that is the end of my fork and double attack video. Watch this video a couple times if you need to. These are some really good puzzles with some really interesting tactics that could happen in your actual games.